I don't need to remind you that we have multiple obstacles on our path, both large and small, that we keep bumping into. And if you ask me to name, sort of one thing, the most challenging obstacle on our path, it would have to be our ego, the ego. So what I'm addressing this morning, self-importance, is one of the many tentacles of that the ego sends out, if you will. Um, in Buddhism, the concept of self-importance is viewed as a significant obstacle to spiritual growth. And this is rooted in the broader understanding in the teachings of self and the nature of reality. So I want to explore this morning how self-importance is perceived and addressed within the teachings. But I want to fast forward a little bit and give a little modern context for my thoughts today, and share with you some perspective from the historian. This is Christopher Lasch, Lasch,
Yeah,
wrote a book in 1979, which won the National Book Award in 1980, called The Culture of Narcissism. I really recommend it if you're not familiar with it, if you want to take a deeper dive. But anyway, in it, he argued that our system, especially our capitalist system, with this emphasis on individuality and personal success, really normalized narcissism, which is another word for self-importance. And and in its extreme forms, it involves a great being consumed with self-interest and self-importance. It's all about me, and the ego to the exclusion of others, to the exclusion of the greater good. And Christopher Lasch described it this way. He says, quote, and remember, this is 45, 44 years ago. He said, quote, the fascination with fame and celebrity, the fear of competition, the inability to suspend disbelief, the shallowness and transitory quality of personal relations, the horror of death. That's how he described narcissism 45 years ago. Now, he's not speaking from the perspective of the Dharma, but it does dovetail back into what we're going to talk about today. But just think about how much worse all of that has gotten in the years since he wrote that. And especially with social media and with the worship of celebrity in our culture. You think celebrity were somehow, these ancient Greek gods or something. So self-importance that I'm going to talk about today refers to this ego-dominated, inflated, and fixed sense of self. And we talked about that, but fixed in the sense of, I'm special, I'm important, everyone needs to sort of, march to my tune. And remember that as the Buddha taught it, the doctrine of no self refers to when he's talking about that, he's referencing this notion of a self which is permanent and an unchanging entity, and how that is an illusion. How we may want to try to hold on to that, but it's just an illusion. Instead, what he suggests, and what I think is the correct perspective, is that our self, this experience of self, is really a collection of constantly changing physical and mental components. We're constantly in flux. But this view of self, the Buddhist view of self, is really in contrast to the modern Western psychological theories that emphasize the importance of this stable self-identity. You'll hear a lot of talk about that. But from a Buddhist perspective, self-importance is seen as a manifestation, one of the many manifestations of the ego, which we know to be one of the primary sources of our suffering. And as we often talk about, the ego creates this false sense of separation between ourselves and others. It leads us to self-interested desires, aversions, and ultimately suffering, because it is constantly seeking validation. It is constantly seeking to win. It is constantly seeking a sense of superiority, which are inherently unstable and unsatisfying, and which ultimately lead to isolation and greater suffering. The Buddha taught that all phenomena, including us, lack inherent existence in terms of a fixed existence and are interdependent. And when we see this, when we lean into this, It helps us manage the ego. It's not going to go away, obviously. I mean, we need it, but we need to manage it because it can really run amok. So we need to manage the ego and the associated self-importance. And where that takes us is in the direction of a more compassionate and interconnected way of being. So our practices of mindfulness and meditation help us observe our thoughts and feelings without attachment. And that's where we do the sort of homework, the practice for getting some perspective on the ego. Because instead there we recognize the transient nature of the self, how it's always changing, and it begins to reduce or lessen the grip of this ego-driven sense of self-importance. Believe me, and this goes contrary to the culture, which emphasizes if you wear this, drive this, do this, lose weight, go to the gym, whatever, you'll be happy. That's the ticket to happiness. The culture's constantly telling us to feed the ego as a source of happiness. But the real antidote to the ego's preoccupations, especially those that cause so much suffering, is to cultivate compassion and loving kindness toward ourselves and others. Okay, that's the antidote. By focusing on the well-being of others, we diminish the focus on ourselves. We reduce our self-importance and the suffering that comes with trying to maintain that self-importance. It is an endless treadmill trying to maintain that sense of self-importance. And eventually, time, reality, everything catches up with us. We decline, and it's not working. And as I've often said, an aging narcissist is not pretty. It's just not something that's very attractive because we lose all those qualities that we thought made us so special. But that's why it's kind of a false god. That's why it's kind of a fruitless pursuit. Realizing how we're interdependent in all with everything and everyone helps us overcome this illusion of a separate self-important self and fosters a sense of unity, fosters a sense of community, and de-emphasizes the individual ego. So I'm going to say this twice because it's really the essence of what I want to convey today. From a Buddhist perspective, self-importance is a trap that stems from the illusion of a permanent special self. From a Buddhist perspective, self-importance is a trap that stems from the illusion of a permanent special self. It leads to suffering, creates a false sense of separation, and keeps us focused on our desires. I need more of this to be special. I need more money. I need more youth. I need a new car. I need a new whatever. And we push away our aversions because they are contrary to that sense of self-importance. I can't look at my deficits. I can't look at my failings because they are not consistent with this image of self-importance that I'm trying to cultivate and hold on to. We move, when we're in this ego-driven and dominated existence, it takes us away from greater freedom and connection to others in our world. Okay? So that's the price we pay for holding on to this self-importance. And again, let me say, we need our ego to get through the world, to make choices, to do all kinds of things. But it is a really tricky part of ourselves, and as I said at the beginning, accounts for much, if not most, of our suffering. When we look at all the ways that it distorts reality, that it thrives on the three poisons of greed, hatred, and delusion. Greed, me, more. Hatred or aversion, push away the negative, push away those that I don't like, and delusion, not seeing things as they are, seeing things as I want them to be. Oh, I'm special, I'm great, I'm wonderful, whatever. So let me stop there. That is self-importance and how it is a trap and a major obstacle to our spiritual progress.